The medical bay on Station Harmony buzzed with its usual morning activity. Dr. Sarah Chen checked her tablet as she walked between the examination rooms. Today felt like any other day until she saw the appointment that made her pause. The Predotar family was coming in for their monthly health check. Sarah had been working with alien species for 5 years now. But the Predotars still made her nervous. They were the galaxy's most feared hunters. 8 feet tall, with muscles like steel cables, they had claws that could cut through metal and teeth designed for tearing flesh. Their yellow eyes could see in complete darkness, and their hearing was so sharp they could detect a heartbeat from across a room. Most species in the galaxy avoided the Predotars when possible. Even the proud Zenthari warriors, who feared nothing in battle, stepped aside when a Predotar walked past. But Sarah had learned something others missed. Under all that scary appearance, the Predotars were just trying to raise their families like everyone else. The door to examination room 3 slid open with a soft hiss. Krath entered first, his massive frame filling the doorway. His mate Vess followed, and between them walked their cub, Zex. The little Predotar barely reached Sarah's waist, though even at that size, his claws were already sharp enough to be dangerous. "Good morning," Sarah said with a warm smile. She had learned that Predotars respected directness. "How has everyone been feeling?" How has everyone been feeling?" Krath's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "We are well, Dr. Chen. The cub grows strong." Sarah nodded and began her standard checkups. She scanned Krath first, then Vess. Their biology was straightforward. Perfect predator bodies, designed by millions of years of evolution for one purpose. Their stomachs could only process meat. Their teeth were made for cutting, not grinding. Even their intestines were shorter than most species because they only needed to digest protein and fat. When she turned to Zex, something felt different. The cub sat quietly on the examination table, his large yellow eyes watching her every move. Most young Predotars were active and restless during checkups. They wanted to explore and play, but Zex seemed thoughtful in a way that surprised her. "How are you feeling, Zex?" Sarah asked as she ran her scanner over his small body. "I am well, Dr. Chen," the cub replied in a voice much softer than his parents'. "But I have been wondering about things." Krath and Vess exchanged a look. Sarah noticed the tension that suddenly filled the room. "What kind of things?" Sarah asked gently. Zex looked at his parents, then back at Sarah. "I watch the humans in the station cafeteria. They eat many different foods. Green things and brown things and foods that smell sweet. But we only eat meat, always meat. I was wondering." He paused, as if gathering courage. "Why must I always eat meat? The humans eat plants and they seem strong. Why can't I try other foods too?" The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Krath's claws extended slightly, a sign of stress among his species. Vess made a low growling sound that Sarah had learned meant disapproval. "Zex," Krath said in a voice that carried warning. "We do not ask such questions. We are Predotar. We eat meat because that is our nature. It is who we are. But why?" Zex pressed on, his young voice full of curiosity. "I see the Zilani eating fruits, and they are happy. I see humans eating many things, and they are strong and smart. Why must we only have one choice?" Vess stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Because we are hunters, cub. We are the apex of creation. Our ancestors conquered worlds with fang and claw. We do not eat grass like prey animals." Sarah watched the exchange with growing interest. In all her years studying alien biology, she had never heard a young Predotar question their species' fundamental nature. It was unheard of. Predotars were proud of being carnivores. It was central to their identity, their culture, their very sense of self. "I understand being proud," Zex said quietly. "But I do not understand why pride means I cannot choose." Krath's growl was low and dangerous. "Enough. Dr. Chen, please continue your examination. We will deal with these strange ideas at home." But Sarah found herself unable to move on. As a scientist, she was trained to ask questions, to explore possibilities. As a human, she believed in choice and freedom. She looked at the small cub who had asked something so simple yet so revolutionary. "It's an interesting question, Zex," she said carefully. She could feel the parent's eyes burning into her. "Many species have different diets. Some eat only plants, some eat only meat, and some eat both. See?" Zex turned to his parents with excitement. "Dr. Chen says some species eat both. Why not us?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Krath took a step towards Sarah, his massive form casting a shadow over her. "Dr. Chen, you will not encourage these thoughts. Our cub is confused. He will learn proper Predotar ways." Sarah felt her heart racing, but she held her ground. She had seen too much fear in the galaxy, too many species limiting themselves because of old ideas about what they were supposed to be. "I'm not trying to confuse anyone," she said calmly. "I'm just saying that questions are natural. All young beings are curious about the world." "Not Predotar cubs," Vess said firmly. "We know our place, we know our purpose. But what if there could be more than one purpose?" Zex asked, his voice small but determined. "What if I could be strong like a Predotar, but also try new things like humans do?" The examination room fell silent again. Sarah realized she was witnessing something that had never happened before in Predotar history. A young one questioning the absolute rules that had governed their species for countless generations. Krath's voice was deadly quiet when he spoke. "We are leaving. Dr. Chen, you will forget this conversation happened. Come, Zex. You have much to learn about proper behavior." As the family left, Sarah watched Zex look back at her with those bright yellow eyes. In them, she saw something that made her chest tighten with emotion. She saw hope, and she saw a question that would not be easily silenced. After they were gone, Sarah stood alone in the examination room, staring at her tablet. The checkup data showed normal, healthy readings for all three Predotars, but she knew that what had happened here was anything but normal. A young Predotar had asked why things had to be the way they always were. And for the first time in her career, Sarah realized she might have the scientific tools to help answer that question. The only problem was that no one in the galaxy would want to hear the answer. 3 days after the examination, Sarah could not stop thinking about Zex's question. She had run the standard tests, filed her reports, and tried to go back to her normal routine, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw those bright yellow eyes full of curiosity and hope. As a xenobiologist, Sarah had studied dozens of species. She knew that evolution was messy and complex. Nothing in biology was ever as simple as it seemed on the surface. The idea that any species was locked into one single way of living seemed wrong to her scientific mind. That evening, Sarah stayed late in her lab. The station's lights had dimmed to simulate nighttime, and most beings had gone to their quarters. She pulled up every file she had on Predotar biology and began reading with fresh eyes. The basic facts were well known. Predotars were obligate carnivores, meaning they could only survive on meat. Their digestive systems were short and simple. Designed to process protein and fat quickly, they had no grinding teeth for plant matter. Their stomachs produced powerful acids that could break down tough muscle and bone. But as Sarah dug deeper into the research, she found things that made her pause. Ancient Predotar fossils showed traces of different tooth structures in their earliest ancestors. Their stomach lining had unusual protein markers that seemed to serve no current purpose. Most interesting of all, young Predotar cubs had enzyme patterns that were different from adults. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She had seen these kinds of biological puzzles before. Evolution never threw anything away completely. It just buried old traits under new ones. If the early Predotars had eaten different foods, traces of that ability might still exist in their genetics. She began running computer models, comparing Predotar biology to other species that had changed their diets over evolutionary time. The Zelani had once been carnivores, but now ate only fruits. The humans themselves were omnivores who had adapted to eat almost anything. The more she studied, the more convinced she became that biology was never destiny. Meanwhile, In the Predotar family quarters, Zex was having problems. "Eat," Krath commanded, pushing a plate of raw meat toward his cub. Zex stared at the food with a look of distress. "I cannot, father. It makes me feel sick." "You will eat because you are Predotar," Ves said firmly. But Zex could not force himself to take a bite. Ever since asking his question in the medical bay, something had changed inside him. The smell of meat made his stomach turn. The sight of blood made him feel weak. He had tried to eat because his parents demanded it, but his body rejected every attempt. "I am trying," Zex said with tears in his large eyes. "But I cannot make myself want it anymore." Krath's frustration grew with each passing meal. Other Predotar families had begun to notice that Zex looked thinner and weaker. Whispers spread through their community. Some said the cub was sick. Others suggested darker things. "Perhaps we should take him back to Dr. Chen," Ves said quietly when Zex had left the room. "No," Krath growled. That human filled his head with strange ideas. "We will handle this ourselves," Krath growled. But as the days passed, Zex continued to refuse food. He grew pale and listless. His bright yellow eyes became dull. The other cubs began to avoid him, sensing something was wrong. Sarah noticed the change immediately when the family returned to the medical bay a week later. Zex had lost weight, and his energy readings were concerning. When she scanned him, she found signs of malnutrition. "He will not eat," Ves admitted reluctantly. "Ever since our last visit, he refuses proper food." Sarah looked at the small cub who sat quietly on the examination table. His head was down and his shoulders slumped. She could see that he was suffering. "Have you tried offering him anything besides meat?" Sarah asked carefully. Krath's eyes flashed dangerously. "We do not feed our children prey food. He will learn to eat correctly, or he will learn to be hungry." "But what if his body is telling him something important?" Sarah pressed. "What if there's a biological reason he's rejecting meat?" "Impossible," Ves said. "All Predotars eat meat. It is our nature." Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She turned to Zex and spoke directly to him, ignoring his parents' growing anger. "Zex, what would you like to eat if you could choose anything?" The cub looked up with surprise. No adult had ever asked him what he wanted. I dream about sweet things," he said quietly, "and green things that smell like the gardens, and soft things that do not fight back when you bite them." Krath roared, a sound that shook the medical equipment. "Enough, Dr. Chen. You will stop this madness. Our cub is sick because you planted these ideas in his mind. Or maybe," Sarah said, standing her ground despite her fear, "your cub is sick because his body is trying to tell you something new." That night, Sarah worked harder than she ever had before. She analyzed Zex's blood samples and compared them to adult Predotar biology. What she found made her hands shake with excitement. Zex's digestive enzymes were different. He had active proteins for breaking down plant cellulose that were dormant in adult Predotars. His stomach acid was less concentrated than normal. Most amazingly, his intestinal length was slightly longer than standard Predotar measurements. The cub was not broken. He was evolving. Sarah knew she was looking at something that had never been documented in galactic science. A member of an obligate carnivore species who had somehow activated ancient genetic pathways for processing plant matter. It should have been impossible, but the evidence was right there in her computer files. She thought about Zex, growing weaker each day because he could not force himself to eat meat that his changing body no longer wanted. She thought about his parents, trapped by thousands of years of tradition and identity. She thought about the other species on the station who feared Predotars so much they would never believe this discovery. As a scientist, Sarah knew she should report her findings to the Galactic Research Council. As a human, she knew that would doom Zex to become a laboratory specimen. As a person who cared about a suffering child, she knew she had to act. Sarah began designing something that had never been attempted before. A hybrid diet that could sustain a Predotar who could no longer eat pure meat. She would need to be careful, secretive, and very lucky. But looking at the data on her screen, Sarah felt something that made her smile despite the danger. She felt hope. If a small Predotar cub could evolve beyond the limits his species had accepted for millions of years, maybe there was hope for all of them. Maybe the galaxy was more flexible than anyone had dared to believe. The question now was whether Sarah could keep Zex alive long enough to prove it. Sarah worked in secret for 2 weeks, using every resource she could access without raising suspicion. The station's human nutritionist, Dr. James Park, became her first ally when she explained the situation. "You want to create food for a carnivore that can't eat meat?" James asked, staring at the biological data Sarah had shown him. "That's like trying to design water for fish that can't swim. Look at these enzyme readings," Sarah insisted, pointing to her tablet. "Zex has active cellulase proteins. His digestive system is changing. He needs nutrition. But his body is rejecting traditional Predotar food." James studied the data for a long time. As a human, he understood adaptation. His own species had survived by learning to eat anything they could find. "What do you need?" Working together, they designed something revolutionary. They created protein-rich plant compounds that could provide the nutrition a Predotar needed without triggering the rejection response Zex was experiencing. They used human food engineering techniques, breaking down plant proteins and rebuilding them to match the amino acid patterns that Predotar bodies required. The hardest part was making it taste acceptable. Predotars were used to the rich, blood-heavy flavors of fresh meat. Sarah and James experimented with natural compounds that could simulate those tastes while using completely different ingredients. "It smells like meat," James said, examining their latest creation. "But it's made from protein-rich fungi and engineered plant matter." "Will it work?" Sarah asked nervously. Only one way to find out. Sarah's chance came during Zex's next medical appointment. The cub looked terrible. He had lost more weight and could barely keep his head up. His parents were desperate and angry. "He still refuses to eat," Krath said, his voice heavy with frustration and grief. "We have tried everything. Punishment, rewards, different types of meat. Nothing works." "Maybe," Sarah said carefully, "we could try a medical supplement, something to help his digestion while he recovers his appetite." Vess looked suspicious. "What kind of supplement?" "A nutritional paste designed for Predotars with eating difficulties," Sarah explained. It was not entirely a lie. It would give him the energy he needs while we figure out what's wrong. Krath considered this. His cub was wasting away before his eyes. "If it will help him eat meat again, we will try it." Sarah prepared a small portion of the hybrid food they had created. It looked like thick, dark paste with the consistency of processed meat. When she offered it to Zex, the cub sniffed it carefully. "It smells good," he said with surprise. For the first time in weeks, he seemed interested in food. Zex took a small bite, then another. His parents watched in amazement as their cub ate an entire portion without stopping. "How do you feel?" Sarah asked. "Better," Zex said. And it was true. Color was already returning to his pale features. "It tastes like meat, but different. Good different." Over the following days, Sarah continued to provide the supplement. Each time, Zex grew stronger and more energetic. His weight returned to normal levels. His eyes brightened. Most importantly, he was happy again. "Whatever this supplement is, it works," Vess admitted during a follow-up visit. "Our cub is healthy again." But Sarah knew this success would not remain secret for long. The Predotar community was small and close-knit. They noticed when one of their cubs suddenly recovered from a mysterious illness. The trouble began when Thrax, the leader of the station's Predotar families, came to see Sarah. Thrax was ancient by Predotar standards, scarred from countless hunts, and absolutely traditional in his beliefs. "Dr. Chen," he rumbled in a voice like grinding stone, "there are disturbing rumors about young Zex." "What kind of rumors?" Sarah asked, though she already knew. "Some say he no longer eats proper food. Some say you have given him prey medicine that has changed his nature." Thrax's yellow eyes were hard and unforgiving. "These rumors must be false." Sarah felt sweat on her palms. Zex is healthy and growing. Isn't that what matters? What matters is that he remains Predotar, Thrax said. We have heard that he has been seen playing with herbivore cubs. We have heard that he shows no interest in hunting games. We have heard that he speaks of wanting to help heal instead of hunt. All of these things were true. As Zex had grown stronger on his new diet, his personality had changed too. He was gentler, more curious, more interested in learning than fighting. Sarah had watched him befriend young beings from other species. Something adult Predotars would never do. Perhaps, Sarah said carefully, these changes are not bad things. Thrax's claws extended fully. Dr. Chen, you will tell me exactly what you have done to that cub. You will tell me now. Sarah knew she was caught. She could lie. But Thrax would investigate further. She could refuse to answer. But that would only make things worse for Zex and his family. So she told the truth. She explained her research, her discoveries about Zex's unique biology, and the hybrid diet she had created. She showed Thrax the scientific data, the nutritional analysis, and the evidence that Zex was thriving. When she finished, Thrax was silent for a long time. You have poisoned a Predotar cub with prey food, he said finally. You have corrupted his nature and made him weak. I've kept him alive, Sarah protested. He was dying because his body couldn't process traditional Predotar food. See, better to die as a true Predotar than live as a corruption, Thrax snarled. You will stop this treatment immediately. The cub will learn to eat correctly, or face the consequences. And if he can't, if his biology truly has changed, then he is no longer Predotar. That evening, Thrax called a meeting of all Predotar families on the station. Sarah was not invited, but she heard about it from Krath, who came to see her afterward. The big Predotar looked older than she had ever seen him. They want you removed from the station, he said quietly. They say you are a danger to our young. And what do you think? Sarah asked. Krath was quiet for a moment. I think my cub was dying and now he lives. I think he smiles again and plays again and learns again. But I also think... He struggled with the words. I think he may not be the same kind of Predotar we have always been. Is that necessarily bad? I do not know, Krath admitted. But I know the others will not accept it. They want Zex to return to traditional food immediately. They want you to leave the station. They want this to never have happened. They want never have happened. They want Zex to return to traditional food. Sarah felt her heart sink. What will happen to Zex if I'm forced to leave? They will make him eat meat or... Krath could not finish the sentence. Or what? Or they will say he is no longer one of us. And if he is not one of us, he cannot stay with us. That night, Sarah sat in her laboratory, surrounded by her research data. She had proven that evolution could happen in a single generation under the right circumstances. She had shown that even the most rigid biological rules could be bent. She had saved a young life and opened a door to possibilities no one had imagined. But she had also challenged the fundamental identity of an entire species. And now, both she and Zex would pay the price for that discovery. Unless she could find a way to make the galaxy listen to what the science was telling them, unless she could prove that change was not always destruction, unless she could show them that sometimes, the strongest thing you could do was choose to become something new. The emergency council session was called for the next morning. Sarah had barely slept, knowing that everything she had worked for was about to be decided by beings who feared change more than anything else in the galaxy. Station Harmony's main council chamber was larger than she remembered. Representatives from 12 different species sat in a circle, their various forms creating a strange mix of shapes and colors. The Zenthari delegation wore their ceremonial battle armor. The crystalline Vorthan representatives hummed with nervous energy. The plant-like Solani rustled their leaves in what Sarah recognized as distress. At the center of it all sat Thrax and 3 other Predotar elders, their massive forms dominating the space around them. They had demanded this hearing, and now they would control it. Council leader Merc, a wise old Zenthari veteran, called the session to order. We are here to discuss accusations made against Dr. Sarah Chen, the human xenobiologist assigned to our medical staff. Thrax rose to speak, his voice carrying easily across the chamber. Council Leader Merc, honored representatives, we come before you today because of a crime against nature itself. This human has poisoned one of our cubs with prey food, corrupting his biology and destroying his identity as a predator. Murmurs of concern rippled through the assembled representatives. Sarah could see the fear in their faces. Most species in the galaxy were intimidated by predators under normal circumstances. The idea of making them angry was terrifying. These are serious accusations, Merc said, looking at Sarah. Dr. Chen, how do you respond? Sarah stood on shaking legs. She was the only human in the chamber, surrounded by beings who could easily overpower her. But she thought of Zex, probably sitting in his family's quarters, wondering if he would be forced to return to a diet that made him sick. Council Leader Merc, representatives, I am guilty of only one thing. I saved a dying child. Quote, dying? Scoffed another Predator elder named Grax. The cub was not dying. He was learning discipline. He was starving, Sarah said firmly. His body weight had dropped 20% below normal levels. His blood work showed severe nutritional deficiency. He was literally wasting away because he could not force himself to eat traditional Predator food. Because you filled his head with unnatural ideas, Thrax growled. No, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. Because his biology was changing. Because evolution does not stop just because we want it to. She activated her tablet and projected her research data onto the chamber's display screens. Charts and graphs filled the air, showing enzyme patterns and nutritional analyses. Young Zex has active genes for processing plant matter that are dormant in adult predators. His digestive system is longer than normal. His stomach acid is less concentrated. These are not signs of sickness or corruption. They are signs of adaptation. The Vorthan representative, a being made of living crystal, spoke in chiming tones. Are you suggesting that this individual is evolving beyond his species' limitations? I am saying that evolution never stops, Sarah replied. Every species in this chamber has changed over millions of years. The Zenthari were once herbivores. The Solani used to be mobile. The Predators themselves have fossils showing different tooth structures in their ancestors. Ancient history, Grax dismissed. We are what we are now. But what if what we are could be more than what we've always been? Sarah asked. What if this cub represents a new possibility for his species? The chamber erupted in discussion. Some representatives seemed intrigued by the scientific data. Others looked concerned about the implications. The Predator elders radiated anger. Thrax slammed his massive fist onto his chair's armrest, cracking the metal. Enough! This human speaks of changing our very nature. She talks of corruption and calls it evolution. We demand that she be removed from this station immediately, and that the cub be returned to proper Predator ways. And if he cannot adapt to those ways? Asked Sil 9, the Solani representative, her voice like wind through leaves. Then he is not truly Predator. Thrax said coldly. You would abandon a child? Sarah asked, her human emotions breaking through her scientific composure. You would cast out a member of your own species because he's different? We would preserve the purity of what makes us who we are, Thrax replied. And who decided what makes you who you are? Sarah demanded. Who wrote the rule that said being Predator means you can never change? Never grow? Never become something new? The chamber fell silent. Sarah realized she had asked a question that no one had ever considered before. Tradition, Grax said finally. Millions of years of tradition. Tradition is just peer pressure from dead people, Sarah said, using an old human saying. It's not a law of physics. It's not a commandment from the universe. It's just what worked for your ancestors in their time. She walked to the center of the chamber, looking at each representative in turn. Every species here has traditions about what they can and cannot do. But humans learned something important in our history. We learned that the most dangerous words in any language are, "That's how we've always done it." The human looked directly at Thrax. You want to know what I see when I look at Zex? I see courage. I see a young being who asked a simple question and refused to accept. Because That's how things are, as an answer. I see the future knocking on your door. We see corruption, Thrax rumbled. Because you're afraid, Sarah said simply. You're afraid that if one Predator can choose differently, others might too. You're afraid that your identity is so fragile, it cannot survive. One child asking, why? Before Thrax could respond, the chamber doors opened. Krath entered, leading Zex by the hand. The small Predator looked around the huge chamber with wide yellow eyes. I asked to bring my cub, Krath said quietly, because this decision affects him most of all. Merc looked uncertain. This is highly irregular. Please, a small voice said. Zex stepped forward, still holding his father's hand. I would like to speak for myself. The silence in the chamber was complete. Never before had a Predator cub addressed a galactic council. Sarah held her breath. I do not understand why everyone is angry, Zex said in his clear young voice. I asked a question because I was curious. Dr. Chen helped me when I was sick. Now I am healthy and strong. I can run and play and learn new things. He looked around the chamber at all the different species represented there. I see Zenthari warriors and Solani gardeners and Vorthen builders. They are all different, but they all belong here. Why cannot I be different and still belong with the Predators? Thrax's voice was harsh. Because being Predator means something specific. It means hunting and strength and eating meat. I am still strong, Zex said simply. I just want to choose what makes me strong instead of being told what must make me strong. The small cub turned to look directly at the Predator elders. If being Predator means I cannot ask questions or make choices or be friends with other species, then maybe being Predator is too small for who I want to become. The words hit the chamber like a thunderbolt. A Predator cub had just suggested that his species' identity was limiting rather than defining. Sarah felt tears in her eyes. This brave little being was willing to give up everything familiar rather than surrender his right to choose his own path. You see? Thrax said, his voice full of pain. The corruption is complete. He no longer even wants to be one of us. No, Sarah said, stepping beside Zex. He wants to be the best possible version of himself. And maybe, just maybe, that could make him the best possible kind of Predator too. The vote, when it came, would determine not just Zex's fate, but the future of choice itself on Station Harmony. The council chamber remained silent for what felt like hours after Zex finished speaking. Representatives looked at each other, at the small Predator cub, and at Sarah. No one seemed sure what to do next. Finally, council leader Merc spoke. This matter requires careful consideration. We will recess for 1 hour while the council deliberates. As the representatives filed out to discuss the situation privately, Sarah knelt down next to Zex. The little Predator looked tired, but determined. Are you scared? She asked gently. Yes, Zex admitted. But I am more scared of pretending to be something I am not for the rest of my life. Krath placed a massive hand on his son's shoulder. Whatever happens, I am proud of your courage. Even if the council decides against us? Zex asked. Krath looked at Sarah, then back at his cub. You taught me something today. You taught me that being a good father means protecting my child's right to choose his own path, even if it is not the path I would choose for him. When the council reconvened, the tension in the chamber was thick enough to cut. Merc stood and addressed the assembly. This case has forced us to consider questions that go to the heart of what it means to be part of a galactic community. Do species have the right to enforce traditional behaviors on their members? Do individuals have the right to choose paths that diverge from their species' norms? And who decides what is natural versus what is possible? He looked directly at Thrax. The Predator delegation argues for the preservation of species identity and traditional ways of life. These are important values that deserve respect. Then he turned to Sarah. Dr. Chen argues for individual choice and the right to adapt based on changing biological needs. These are also important values. Merc paused, looking around the chamber. After much discussion, this council has reached a decision. We rule that individual beings have the fundamental right to make choices about their own lives, as long as those choices do not harm others. Thrax rose angrily. You cannot force us to accept this corruption of our nature. We are not forcing you to accept anything, Merc replied calmly. But we also cannot force young Zex to reject his nature simply because it differs from traditional expectations. If the Predotar community cannot accept him as he chooses to be, then he will find acceptance elsewhere on this station. The ruling was clear. Zex would be allowed to continue his chosen diet and lifestyle. Sarah would not be removed from the station. But the Predotar community could choose whether or not to accept these decisions. In the days that followed, the Predotar families were deeply divided. Some, led by Thrax, refused to have anything to do with Zex or his family. They continued their traditional ways and avoided any contact with the corrupted cub, but others began to watch Zex carefully. They saw that he remained strong and healthy on his hybrid diet. They noticed that he was happier and more energetic than many cubs who followed traditional feeding. Most importantly, they observed that his different choices had not made him weak or broken. 2 weeks after the council ruling, something unexpected happened. Another young Predotar, a female cub named Vara, approached Sarah during a routine medical check. Dr. Chen, Vara said quietly, I have been watching Zex. He seems very happy. Could you tell me about the foods he eats? Vara's parents, Jorik and Nella, exchanged worried looks. But they did not stop their daughter from asking. Are you having trouble eating traditional foods? Sarah asked carefully. Not trouble exactly, Vara said. But I do not enjoy hunting games like the other cubs. I like growing things in the station's gardens. I like helping the Solani tend their plants. And sometimes, when I smell their fruits, I wonder what they taste like. Sarah looked at Vara's parents. What do you think about your daughter's interests? Jorik spoke slowly. We have seen what happened with Zex. At first, we thought it was wrong. But now, he paused. Now we see a young Predotar who is confident and strong and happy. Perhaps there is more than one way to be Predotar. Within a month, 3 more young Predotars had approached Sarah about dietary alternatives. Each had different reasons and different needs, but all shared something in common. They wanted to choose their own path rather than simply follow tradition. Sarah established what she called the individual choice protocol. Working with nutritionists from multiple species, she developed dietary options for young beings who found themselves unable or unwilling to follow their species' traditional eating patterns. The program was voluntary, carefully monitored, and always reversible if an individual decided to return to conventional foods. The most surprising development came from an unexpected source. Dr. Thelm, a Vorthan scientist who had been studying the case, approached Sarah with fascinating research. Your work with young Predotars has inspired me to examine our own assumptions, Thelm said, his crystalline form chiming as he spoke. We Vorthens have always believed we could only consume certain mineral compounds, but your research suggests that biological limitations might be more flexible than we assumed. Soon, the individual choice protocol expanded to include young beings from multiple species. A Zenthari adolescent who wanted to try a pacifist lifestyle. A Solani who was curious about mobility and travel. A human teenager who wanted to experiment with photosynthetic supplements. Not all the experiments worked. Some young beings tried alternative lifestyles and decided to return to traditional ways. Others found hybrid approaches that combined old and new, but the important thing was that they had the choice. 6 months after his first question in the medical bay, Zex had become something remarkable. He was still clearly a Predotar, with his claws and teeth and yellow eyes, but he was also something new. He was stronger than many traditionally fed cubs, but also gentler. He was curious about the galaxy beyond hunting and fighting. Most importantly, he was happy. Zex had also become a bridge between species in ways no one had expected. He played with cubs from other species, learning about their cultures and sharing his own. He helped in the station's gardens, worked with the medical staff, and even assisted other young beings who were exploring their own choices. I do not understand why everyone was so scared, Zex told Sarah during one of their regular checkups. I am still me. I just get to choose what kind of me I want to be. The changes reached beyond station harmony. Reports of the individual choice protocols spread to other stations and colonies. Some places rejected the ideas completely. Others began their own careful experiments with allowing young beings more freedom to explore different lifestyles. On Earth, human scientists studied Sarah's research with great interest. They had always known that humans were adaptable, but seeing other species discover their own flexibility was exciting. It suggested that the galaxy might be capable of more change and growth than anyone had imagined. The Predotar community on Station Harmony remained split. Thrax and his supporters continued to reject any deviation from traditional ways. But a growing number of Predotar families had begun to question whether strength came from rigidity or from the ability to adapt. Krath became an unexpected leader in this new way of thinking. "My son taught me that being strong means being brave enough to choose your own path," he told other Predotar parents. "Maybe the strongest thing we can teach our cubs is not what to think, but how to think for themselves." As Sarah watched Zex playing with a group of cubs from 6 different species, she reflected on what had happened. One small question from one curious child had started a revolution in thinking that was spreading across the galaxy. It had not been easy. There had been resistance, fear, and anger. Some beings had lost friends and family members who could not accept change. Others had discovered freedoms they never knew they wanted, but the most important thing had been proved beyond doubt. When individuals were given the choice to determine their own paths, most of them flourished in ways that surprised everyone, including themselves. Zex looked over at Sarah and waved with one clawed hand. In his bright yellow eyes, she could see the question that had started everything. But now it had grown into something bigger. It was no longer just, "Why must I always eat meat?" It had become, "Why must anyone always be limited by what others expect them to be?" And across the galaxy, in medical bays and family quarters and schoolrooms, other young beings were beginning to ask that same question. They were discovering that the strongest choice of all was the choice to become whoever they were brave enough to be. The revolution had begun with a single Predotar cub who dared to ask why. And like all the best revolutions, it was powered not by force or anger, but by hope and the simple desire for freedom. In the end, that was the most human gift of all. Not the ability to adapt or survive or solve problems, but the courage to believe that things could always be better than they were, and the determination to help others discover that same courage in themselves.